Welcome to a comfyHQ segment of The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is your host, Kate. Today we're talking about two essential and often tricky parts of leadership: building trust with your team and addressing those situations where someone has great skills but brings the mood and performance down. These questions get to the heart of what leadership really is: being clear, consistent, and compassionate, even when it's uncomfortable. How do leaders cultivate trust and credibility with their teams? This question comes at a great time. I just recorded the second anniversary episode, and we talked all about trust, so it's still fresh on my mind. And while I won't repeat that conversation, there are some themes worth revisiting here: communication, being a role model of trust and trustworthiness, and using trust to build psychological safety. Let's begin with the role of communication in trust building. I'm fond of saying that communication, as a skill or practice, is a big bucket. So for our purposes today, communication is the messages you share and the methods you use to share them. And for both messages and methods, the first factor in cultivating trust is consistency. What you tell people needs to be consistent over time, and it needs to happen in reliable ways. This means consistent frequency, audience, and channel. If you commit to a weekly email update for your team, for example, you grow trust when the content of the update aligns with actual events, when you send the email at the same time each week, and when you remember to include everyone on the team. You told people what you would do, you did it, and then did it again and again. Being reliable is a key component of being trustworthy. Reliability extends beyond communication when it comes to trust. It also supports you in being a role model for trust with your team. Modeling trust goes in two directions. First, behaving in ways that make it easy for others to trust you. And second is actively trusting your team. The behaviors that encourage trust include honesty, humility, and accountability. In fact, we could say it's all honesty with others, with and about yourself, and about results. Honesty with others is pretty straightforward. You tell the truth. This includes when you don't have the answers and when you can't disclose information, meaning you say, "I don't know," and "I'm not able to discuss that" when you need to. Honesty with yourself, about yourself, is another way to talk about humility. You know and name your strengths and weaknesses, and when you do well or when you miss the mark. This can lead to humble pride in a success and candid apologies for missteps. Last here is honesty about results, or accountability. Leaders who role model this start off being clear about expectations, and they own their results. When you approach each encounter with honesty, you build and keep trust. This type of holistic honesty also supports placing your trust in others. When leaders can honestly and accurately assess employees' abilities, provide compassionate feedback, and be transparent with results, they lay the foundation for delegation and trust in their team. Balanced communication and a willingness to celebrate success and address problems, these both contribute to trust. And they also support psychological safety, a kind of trust 2.0. When you nurture an environment that supports and expects honesty and accountability, when you own your results as the leader, and when you are consistent in your communication and feedback, you make it possible for your team to do their best and to stretch and experiment. And when mistakes happen, and they will, you have already established the circumstances where people can reveal and learn from those mistakes. All of this based on the platform of trust you've built. So be confident that trust and credibility will naturally grow from your consistency, accountability, and compassion. How do I handle a team member who has great skills but a bad attitude? In my time working in HR and organizational development in hospitals, I lost count of the number of times I heard, "She's a great nurse, but..." This was the language these managers had for talking about attitude concerns. What they didn't always see, though, is that this is actually a question of performance, because performance extends beyond skill proficiency. Productivity is always a great starting point for assessing performance. So are skills. But these only cover what we do. We have to consider how the work gets done to have a full picture of an employee's performance. This is just a more effective way to talk about attitude, not what you do, but how you behave. If our good nurse has deep clinical knowledge and the ability to perform essential care efficiently, that is a solid starting point. It's good. But let's say this nurse is starting an IV. She knows every step and can do the task in record time. But she doesn't talk to the patient or explain the procedure or acknowledge any discomfort she causes with the IV. The skills are there, but caregiving is lacking. In other words, the how isn't good. So I would argue that in this case, where we have a fuller picture of what and how the employee works, we shouldn't classify her as a good nurse. We can say the same for someone in a cashier role, data analyst, project manager, or any other job. This perspective is important if you want to address the issue. Without linking what and how, you will struggle to affect change. Because let's be honest, attitude is vague and slippery. It's connected to thoughts and feelings. It's subjective and arguably not within a manager's purview. But behaviors, a manager can talk about those all day long. So your work here is to get really skilled at observing behaviors and communicating what has been observed without interpretation or assumptions. For example, you don't want to say, "Jane, you were rude to that customer." Instead, the feedback should sound like this. "Jane, during your last customer interaction, I saw you roll your eyes. You interrupted the customer multiple times and told her that you weren't willing to go to the stock room to search for the shoes she wanted." Jane can argue with rude, but the objective recounting of her behaviors leaves little room for disagreement. And this makes you free to move beyond talking about Jane's actions to revisiting expectations and exploring the mindsets or other barriers hindering her ability to perform. It's the fundamentals of managing people, feedback, and coaching. All feedback is ultimately a message structured around 3 points: what, why, and how. What you observed, why it matters, and how you deliver the message. See, even your behavior matters. In our example with Jane, we have communicated the what, rolling her eyes, etc. The why could sound like this: "Jane, not only is it a problem that you rolled your eyes, since our standards address courteous and prompt customer service, but by refusing to search the stockroom, you lost a potential sale." You manage your how in these cases with your tone, facial expressions, and body language. You can be firm and direct and still be kind. Because remember, performance conversations aren't personal. They should focus on helping people succeed, and kindness will always help you here. Once you've delivered this simple feedback, you start asking questions to understand what Jane experienced, any details you may have missed, and to generally engage Jane in a conversation that reinforces expectations while still demonstrating respect for the employee. Some questions can include, "I'd appreciate your perspective. Was there something going on that I missed? What prevented you from going to the stockroom?" Or even, How could you have handled this situation differently? This is an effective approach in one-off moments like Jane and the shoe shopper, but the process works when you're confronted with a recurring pattern of behaviors. I imagine that your question is probably based on an unproductive team dynamic. The employee with the bad attitude is disruptive in some way. If that's the case, you can use this same approach to address the behaviors that you're interpreting as a bad attitude. Again, the core skill is objective observation. What exactly do you witness this employee doing that disrupts the team's work? Maybe he repeatedly interrupts his coworkers during meetings and either disagrees with them in front of clients or criticizes their ideas without offering support or solutions. In this case, you would outline what you have seen and then explain why these behaviors are a problem. It could be that the team is losing clients because they're not presenting a united front, and your customers report that they've lost trust because of one of these meetings. Or you may need to explain directly and compassionately that other members of the team don't want to work with this employee, and his actions are creating bottlenecks and lost time. Well, you still want to invite him into the conversation with relevant, neutral questions. Depending on the severity of his behavior, you may need to devote time to resetting behavior expectations and being very clear about what changes you expect to see and by when. This could sound like, Joe, teamwork is important here, and we all have to be able to depend on each other. I expect you to stop disagreeing with your colleagues in client meetings immediately. If you have concerns, please share them before or after these meetings. Ideally, you would bring concerns to your coworkers in a timely and respectful fashion, but you can always bring your concerns to me. Is this a change you can agree to make starting today? By linking behaviors to the full picture of performance, you make it possible to avoid messy and subjective conversations about attitude. When we stop talking about attitude and start talking about behavior, we move from frustration to action. That's how leaders create real change, with clarity, consistency, and a full picture of performance. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. If this episode gave you a useful nudge or a new tactic to try, I'd love to hear about it. And if you've got a leadership or learning question of your own, please send it my way. And as always, if you're looking for a partner to support your team's development or help them get serious about succession planning, you can learn more at 123ltd.com. Thanks for listening. Next week, I'll be back in the comfy chairs with a conversation about healthy workplace cultures.